Okay, you are not going to believe this. The largest land mammal that ever lived was basically a rhino. But get this, a 34-ton hornless rhino relative. 34 tons.
Whoa, 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 hold on a second. 34 tons? Where on earth are you getting that number? That is a complete and total myth. I mean, it's been debunked for decades.
Okay, look, let's look at the actual biology here. The modern consensus, based on real bone measurements, puts its absolute maximum weight at around 15 to 20 tons, which, don't get me wrong, is still ridiculously huge. We're talking more than twice an African elephant, but it's nowhere near 34.
That whole 34-ton thing comes from this wildly optimistic museum reconstruction from the 1930s. They literally took a few bone fragments and just arbitrarily scaled them up. It's terrible science. But you got to admit, a 34-ton version is just way cooler. It's like something out of a fantasy novel. I'm choosing to believe in the cooler version.
You can't just choose to believe physics away. But okay, fine. Let's stick with the real number. Even at 20 tons, how does a mammal's body not just collapse under its own weight? That's the real question here. It's a massive engineering problem.
Right, and it all comes down to this one core concept, graviportality. The animal's body essentially stops behaving like an agile creature and becomes more like a piece of living industrial-grade scaffolding. It's all about managing skeletal stress.
Exactly. I mean, think about it like a skyscraper. You can't build something that massive on flimsy foundations. Smaller animals, they can use a crouched, kind of springy posture, but for Paraceratherium, that would have put an insane amount of bending stress on its bones. So it's switched to a columnar posture, just straight, pillar-like legs held vertically under the body. This aligns all the force with gravity, turning the legs into perfect weight-bearing columns.
No, listen to this part though. The scale is just mind-bending. A shoulder height of 16 feet? That is taller than any elephant that has ever lived. A 24-foot-long body. Its thigh bone alone was almost 5 feet long. You could literally walk under this thing without even ducking. And get this, it even stole a trick from the biggest dinosaurs of all. To save weight, its vertebrae had these hollowed-out sections called pluricoles. It's a classic case of convergent evolution. I guess when you get that big, you have to find ways to lighten the load, and this was nature's go-to solution. Okay, that's a good point. It's a pretty clever adaptation, but it raises an even bigger question. If Paraceratherium solved all these structural problems and got to 20 tons, why did it stop there? Why didn't mammals get as big as the largest sauropod dinosaurs?
Right? I mean, look at this. Based on bone strength alone, a land animal could theoretically get to over 100 tons. But the biggest mammal ever barely cracks 20. There's this massive gap. It's like there's some kind of mammalian glass ceiling.
And that's because the limit wasn't structural, it was physiological. Mammals are just built differently. We lack that super efficient air sac breathing system that sauropods had, which, by the way, also helped lighten their skeletons. Our bodies just carry a much heavier metabolic load. We just couldn't scale up any further.
But being that big came with this beautiful, tragic irony. An adult Paraceratherium was basically predator-proof. I mean, what could possibly touch it? But that same massive size meant it had an incredibly long gestation period and a super slow birth rate. Its greatest defense was also its fatal flaw.
Which brings us to the final act. If this animal was so perfectly engineered for its environment, this unstoppable giant, why did it just disappear?
Well, it wasn't one single thing. It was more like a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolded over millions of years. First, the climate started to cool, and the lush forests that it depended on began to shrink. Then, new competitors, these early elephant relatives called Gomphotheres, invaded from Africa. So the Gomphotheres were the real villains. They were ecosystem engineers that just went around tearing down the remaining woodlands. Okay, yeah, the Gomphotheres were a huge problem, but it was a death by 1,000 cuts. The climate was already changing, new predators were showing up that could target the young, and with that abysmally low birth rate we talked about, the population just couldn't recover from all that pressure. It was a perfect storm. And here's the nail in the coffin. It was a specialist. Its low-crowned teeth were perfectly designed for eating soft leaves and shrubs. When the forests disappeared and were replaced by tough grasslands, its food source vanished. It was physically incapable of eating the new vegetation. It was a specialist in a world that suddenly demanded generalists.
So it all comes back to that. It was the undisputed king, a giant so massive it had no enemies. But that very specialization, that extreme size, locked it into a lifestyle that was completely unforgiving of change. It really makes you wonder, is being the biggest a blueprint for dominance, or is it just a gilded cage?